The afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Meridian Rehabilitation Center, casting warm geometric patterns across the polished hardwood floors. The facility had the understated elegance of a luxury hotel rather than a medical institution, with its marble reception desk, carefully curated artwork, and soft classical music playing in the background. Ben Carter pushed through the double-glass doors with his 5-year-old daughter Mila's small hand clasped securely in his. At 33, Ben had the kind of practical appearance that came from years of solving problems with his hands rather than managing them from behind a desk. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the afternoon wind, and his simple jeans and button-down shirt marked him as someone more comfortable in workshops than boardrooms. "Daddy, this place looks like a princess castle," Mila announced with the wonder that only children could bring to ordinary moments. Her bright blue eyes took in every detail of the impressive lobby while she skipped beside her father with the boundless energy of someone who had never learned to doubt her own capabilities. Ben smiled at his daughter's observation. The Meridian Center was indeed impressive, but he was here for purely practical reasons. Mila had broken her leg 3 months earlier in a playground accident, and while the bone had healed perfectly, she still needed some physical therapy to regain full strength and confidence in her movements. "It is pretty fancy," Ben agreed, approaching the reception desk where a professionally dressed woman greeted them with the kind of polished smile that came with expensive customer service training. "Mr. Carter, we're ready for Mila's session. Please follow me to the pediatric wing." As they walked through corridors lined with motivational posters and state-of-the-art equipment, Ben noticed that most of the other patients and families they encountered looked like they belonged in this upscale environment. Well-dressed parents accompanied children to appointments, and the staff moved with the confident efficiency of people accustomed to serving a clientele that expected excellence. Ben felt slightly out of place, but reminded himself that Mila's insurance covered these sessions, and his daughter deserved the best care available regardless of their modest family budget. The pediatric therapy room was bright and cheerful, filled with colorful equipment designed to make rehabilitation feel like play. Mila immediately gravitated toward a set of balance beams that looked more like a playground obstacle course than medical equipment. "Can I try the rainbow bridge, Daddy?" Mila asked, pointing to a curved balance beam painted in vibrant colors. "Let's wait for the therapist to get here first," Ben replied. But his attention was caught by a young woman sitting alone in a wheelchair near the large windows that overlooked the center's garden. Elena Langston sat with perfect posture despite her obvious dejection, her long blonde hair catching the afternoon light as she stared out at the manicured landscape with unseeing eyes. At 27, she possessed the kind of natural elegance that suggested years of disciplined training, though the wheelchair and the defeated expression on her beautiful face told a story of recent and devastating change. Ben recognized the look of someone struggling with circumstances beyond their control, an expression he had seen in his own mirror during the darkest days following his wife's death 3 years earlier. "Excuse me," Mila said, having noticed Elena as well and possessing none of her father's social hesitation. "Are you waiting for the physical therapy too?" Elena looked up, startled by the direct approach of a confident 5-year-old. For a moment, surprise replaced the sadness in her green eyes. Yes, I suppose I am," Elena replied, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone educated in expensive schools. "I broke my leg, but it's all better now," Mila announced with the matter-of-fact tone children use for significant life events. "Daddy says the doctors here are going to help me run even faster than before." Something in Mila's innocent confidence seemed to crack through Elena's carefully maintained composure. For the first time in months, Elena felt the corners of her mouth lift in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "That's wonderful," Elena said softly. "I'm sure you'll be running marathons soon." Ben approached them quietly, recognizing a moment that might matter more than it initially appeared. "I'm Ben," he said simply, extending his hand to Elena with the same genuine warmth he showed to everyone he met. "And this chatterbox is my daughter Mila." "Elena," she replied, accepting his handshake with surprise at its firm, calloused strength. "If you don't mind me asking," Ben continued gently, "are you working on getting back on your feet too?" The question was asked with such natural kindness that Elena found herself answering honestly instead of deflecting with the polite responses she had perfected over months of well-meaning inquiries. "I'm trying," Elena said quietly. Some days are harder than others. Ben nodded with the understanding of someone who had faced his own impossible days. If you'd like, he said carefully, I could help. I made some recovery equipment for Mila when she was healing, and I learned a few things about making physical therapy feel less like work and more like, well, like something you might actually want to do. Elena looked at this stranger who had just offered assistance with no apparent expectation of anything in return. In his eyes, she saw something she hadn't encountered in months of interactions with medical professionals and well-meaning friends. Genuine hope without pity. Have you ever met someone who brought you hope when you thought it was impossible? And where are you watching this story? Maybe during your own moment of needing encouragement. Let us know in the comments below. Ben Carter's journey to becoming a single father had been shaped by love, loss, and the kind of resilience that develops only through necessity. 3 years earlier, his world had revolved around his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Mila, creating the kind of close-knit family that had made every challenge feel manageable. Sarah had been Ben's college sweetheart, a kindergarten teacher whose laughter could fill any room and whose patience with children seemed limitless. She had been the one to encourage Ben to leave his stable but uninspiring job at a large engineering firm to pursue freelance work that would allow him more time with their growing family. The transition to independent consulting had been challenging initially, but Ben's background in mechanical engineering and his natural problem-solving abilities had gradually built him a reputation for creative solutions to complex technical problems. He specialized in custom equipment design, often working with small manufacturers who needed specialized machinery or with individuals who required adaptive devices for unique situations. But their carefully planned life had been shattered when Sarah was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer during what should have been a routine medical checkup. The 18 months that followed had been a blur of treatments, hope, disappointment, and the gradual realization that some battles couldn't be won through determination alone. Sarah had fought with characteristic grace and strength, but the disease had ultimately claimed her life, leaving Ben to navigate single parenthood while managing his own overwhelming grief. Mila had been too young to fully understand why Mommy couldn't come home from the hospital, but old enough to sense the fundamental change in their family's dynamic. In the months following Sarah's death, Ben had struggled to maintain any semblance of normal life while learning to be both mother and father to a grieving toddler. Well-meaning friends and family members had offered countless suggestions about daycare options, nanny services, and support groups. But Ben had found that the most healing approach was to focus entirely on creating stability and joy for Mila. His freelance engineering work had become both a blessing and a necessity during this period. The flexible schedule allowed him to be available for Mila's needs while still maintaining an income, though it meant working late into the evening after she had gone to sleep and constantly juggling project deadlines with parenting responsibilities. Ben had discovered that he possessed natural instincts for creative parenting that he hadn't known existed. When Mila had trouble sleeping in her own bed, he had designed and built an elaborate blanket fort that made bedtime feel like adventure rather than separation. When she had been afraid of monsters in her closet, he had created a monster detector using LED lights and simple electronics that gave her a sense of control over her fears. These projects had taught Ben valuable lessons about making difficult situations feel manageable through creativity and patience, skills that would prove essential when Mila had her playground accident 3 months earlier. The broken leg had been traumatic for both of them, not because of the physical injury itself, but because it had triggered fears about vulnerability and loss that Ben thought they had successfully processed. Watching his confident, active daughter suddenly afraid to trust her own body had reminded Ben of his own struggles with accepting circumstances beyond his control. But rather than simply following the standard physical therapy protocols recommended by Mila's doctors, Ben had approached her rehabilitation as an engineering problem that required a customized solution. He had researched child development and physical therapy techniques, then designed and built specialized equipment that made her exercises feel like games rather than medical treatments. The balance beam had become a tightrope for brave circus performers. The resistance bands had become superhero training tools. The flexibility exercises had become yoga for getting ready to fly. Each modification had been designed to rebuild Mila's confidence while addressing the specific physical requirements of her recovery. The approach had been remarkably successful. Mila's progress had exceeded her doctor's expectations, but more importantly, she had regained her natural fearlessness and joy in physical movement. Ben had documented the entire process, partly for his own reference and partly because other parents had begun asking him for advice about their own children's recovery challenges. This experience had given Ben a new perspective on the difference between treating symptoms and addressing the whole person. Traditional physical therapy focused on repairing damaged function, but Ben had learned that successful rehabilitation also required rebuilding confidence, motivation, and the emotional connection between mind and body. When he had seen Elena sitting alone in her wheelchair with an expression of profound defeat, Ben had recognized someone who might benefit from the same holistic approach that had helped Mila heal. But more than that, he had seen someone whose situation triggered his natural instinct to help solve problems, particularly when those problems involved people he cared about. Ben's offer to help Elena hadn't been calculated or strategic. It had been the spontaneous response of someone who had learned that healing often required community and creativity rather than just medical expertise. He understood that recovery was as much about hope and purpose as it was about physical rehabilitation. The Meridian Center represented the kind of high-end medical care that Ben could never have afforded for his own family, but Elena's obvious distress had made those differences feel irrelevant. Some needs transcended economic circumstances, and Ben had learned that the most meaningful assistance often came from unexpected sources. Over the following weeks, Ben's offer to help Elena evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. What had begun as simple kindness from a stranger had gradually developed into scheduled sessions that both Ben and Elena looked forward to with increasing enthusiasm. Elena's father, CEO Everett Langston, had initially been skeptical about this unconventional addition to his daughter's expensive rehabilitation program. But when Elena mentioned the engineer and his little girl for the third time in a week, the first time she had shown interest in anything beyond her medical appointments, Everett had decided to investigate this unexpected development. "Tell me about this man who's been working with Elena," Everett had asked Dr. Martinez, the center's director, during one of their regular progress meetings. "Ben Carter appears to be exactly what he claims to be," Dr. Martinez had replied. "A single father whose daughter is receiving therapy here. He has no medical training, but he seems to have a natural understanding of motivation and adaptive problem solving." What Dr. Martinez didn't mention was that Elena's progress had accelerated dramatically since Ben had begun supplementing her formal therapy sessions with his own creative approaches to rehabilitation. Ben had transformed Elena's exercises into collaborative projects that included Mila as an enthusiastic participant. The balance work had become dance lessons where Mila would demonstrate movements for Elena to copy. The strength training had become competitive games where Elena would try to match Mila's achievements on modified equipment. But perhaps most importantly, Ben had started treating Elena like a person who happened to be dealing with a temporary limitation rather than a patient defined by her disability. He asked her opinions about his engineering projects, sought her advice about Mila's education, and included her in conversations about books, music, and current events that had nothing to do with medical recovery. "You know," Elena said one afternoon as they worked together in the center's garden therapy area, "I used to be a professional ballet dancer." This was the first time Elena had volunteered personal information about her life before the accident, and Ben sensed the significance of her decision to share this detail. "That makes sense," Ben replied, watching Elena guide Mila through a series of stretching exercises that looked more like graceful dance movements than physical therapy. "I can see it in the way you move, even now." Elena looked surprised. "Really? I feel so clumsy and awkward most of the time." "You have this natural understanding of how bodies should move through space," Ben explained. "When you teach Mila those stretches, you show her the movements instead of just describing them. That's not something that can be learned, it's something you are." Mila, who had been listening to this conversation while attempting to balance on one foot, piped up with characteristic directness. "Miss Elena, will you dance with me when your legs work again?" The question was asked with such innocent confidence that both adults felt their hearts skip. Elena had spent months avoiding any discussion of future activities, But something about Mila's matter-of-fact assumption that recovery was inevitable made hope feel possible rather than naive. "I would love to dance with you, Mila," Elena said softly. "Maybe we could even teach your daddy some moves." Ben laughed, a sound that had become more frequent during these afternoons at the center. "I should warn you both that I have all the grace of a construction crane, but I'm willing to embarrass myself if it makes you two happy." As the weeks progressed, these conversations became deeper and more personal. Elena began sharing stories about her dancing career, her complicated relationship with her father's expectations, and her fears about what her life might look like if she never fully recovered. Ben listened with the same focused attention he brought to engineering problems, offering insights that were practical rather than merely sympathetic. When Elena worried about being a burden to people who cared about her, Ben reminded her that Mila had taught him that accepting help was often a gift to the people offering it. One evening, Ben said during a particularly meaningful conversation as they sat on the center's patio watching Mila play in the garden, "Mila asked me if I was sad that I had to take care of her by myself." Elena looked at him with concern. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that taking care of her wasn't something I had to do. It was something I got to do, that she made my life more interesting, more challenging, and infinitely more meaningful than it would be without her." Elena considered this perspective quietly. "I never thought about it that way." "People who love us don't consider our needs to be burdens," Ben continued gently. "They consider them to be opportunities to show that love in practical ways." That evening, as they prepared to leave the center, Elena made a request that surprised everyone, including herself. "Would you two like to have dinner with me sometime? Not here at the center, but somewhere normal where we can just talk?" Ben smiled, recognizing the significance of Elena's desire to extend their relationship beyond the medical setting where they had met. "We'd love that," he said simply. "Mila has been wanting to show you her collection of interesting rocks, and I think a restaurant might be a better venue for that than the therapy room." As they said goodbye that evening, all three of them carried the sense that something important was shifting in their relationship, though none of them could have predicted where these changes would ultimately lead. The dinner invitation led to regular evening meetings that soon became the highlight of Elena's week. These gatherings typically took place at family-friendly restaurants where Mila could charm the waitstaff, while Ben and Elena discovered they shared surprisingly similar perspectives on everything from books to social issues to the challenges of maintaining hope during difficult circumstances. It was during one of these dinners that Elena's father, Everett Langston, decided to take a more active role in what he perceived as his daughter's unusual friendship with a single father of modest means. Everett had built his business empire through careful analysis of people's motivations and strategic thinking about relationships that might benefit or threaten his family's interests. While he was genuinely pleased to see Elena showing signs of emotional recovery, he was concerned about the long-term implications of her growing attachment to someone outside their social circle. The meeting between Everett and Ben took place in the executive offices of Langston Industries, a gleaming tower that dominated the city's financial district. Ben arrived wearing his best shirt and tie, though his practical work boots and calloused hands marked him immediately as someone who operated in a very different world from the polished executives who typically visited these offices. "Mr. Carter," Everett began, gesturing for Ben to take a seat in one of the leather chairs arranged around a conference table that could easily seat 20 people. "I understand you've been spending considerable time with my daughter." "Elena and I have become friends," Ben replied carefully, sensing that this conversation was heading toward territory that would require diplomatic navigation. "I appreciate the positive impact you've had on her recovery," Everett continued. "Elena speaks about you and your daughter frequently, and I can see that these interactions have improved her outlook significantly." Ben waited, understanding that praise was likely to be followed by conditions or concerns. "Which is why I'd like to propose a formal arrangement," Everett said, sliding a folder across the table toward Ben. "I'm prepared to offer you a position as Elena's personal rehabilitation coordinator. The salary would be $100,000 per year, plus benefits and a housing allowance that would allow you to relocate closer to our estate." Ben opened the folder and scanned the contract documents, which were more generous than anything he could have imagined earning through his engineering work. The offer was clearly designed to be attractive enough to accept without question. "This is very generous," Ben said slowly, but I'm not sure I understand what you're asking me to do. Continue doing exactly what you've been doing, Everett replied. Help Elena regain her confidence and physical capabilities. Provide the kind of motivation and support that has clearly been effective. Ben studied the contract more carefully, recognizing the subtle language that would essentially make him an employee whose primary responsibility was managing Elena's emotional well-being. Mr. Langston, Ben said finally, I appreciate this offer, but I have to decline. Everett's eyebrows rose in surprise. He was accustomed to people accepting his proposals enthusiastically, and Ben's refusal had not been among the scenarios he had considered. May I ask why? Ben set the folder back on the table and leaned forward slightly. Because I don't want Elena to think that my friendship with her is something that can be purchased. If she knew you were paying me to spend time with her, it would change everything about our relationship. She wouldn't need to know the detail, Everett suggested. But I would know, Ben replied firmly, and eventually she would figure it out. Elena is intelligent enough to recognize when people's motivations aren't genuine. Everett was quiet for a moment, studying Ben with the analytical gaze he typically reserved for business negotiations. What is it that you want, Mr. Carter? Everyone wants something. Ben considered the question seriously before responding. I want Elena to believe in herself again. I want her to understand that her value as a person isn't determined by her physical capabilities or her father's wealth. I want her to feel confident making her own choices about her life and her relationships. And you think my offer would interfere with those goals? I think your offer would make me an employee instead of a friend, Ben said. Elena needs friends right now more than she needs another person whose job is to take care of her. Unknown to both men, Elena had been waiting in the reception area outside Everett's office, intending to surprise her father with a visit. The office doors were thick, but she had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was being discussed. As Ben left the building, Elena intercepted him in the lobby. How much of that did you hear? Ben asked, recognizing the expression on Elena's face. Enough, Elena replied. Enough to know that you just turned down more money than most people see in a lifetime because you didn't want me to question your motives. Ben looked uncomfortable with the praise implicit in her observation. It wasn't that dramatic. I just think some things shouldn't be for sale. Elena felt something shift fundamentally in her perception of Ben in that moment. She had been surrounded her entire life by people who modified their behavior based on her father's wealth and influence. But here was someone who had explicitly rejected financial incentive in order to preserve the authenticity of their relationship. Would you like to get coffee? Elena asked. I think we should talk about what this means for us. Ben nodded, understanding that their friendship was about to evolve into something more complex and potentially more meaningful than either of them had anticipated. The coffee shop Elena chose was a small, independent cafe far from the upscale establishments she typically frequented. A deliberate choice that reflected her desire to continue their conversation in neutral territory rather than in settings that emphasized the differences in their backgrounds. As they settled into a corner booth with their drinks, Elena seemed to be gathering courage for something important. I need to tell you something, she began, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for comfort. When I first met you and Mila, I hadn't spoken to anyone, really spoken to anyone, in weeks. Not my father, not my friends, not even my therapist beyond answering their direct questions. Ben listened quietly, understanding that Elena was sharing something significant. The accident changed more than just my ability to walk, she continued. It changed how I saw myself, how I thought about my future, and how I related to everyone around me. I felt like I had become this fragile thing that people had to be careful around. Elena paused, looking directly at Ben. But you and Mila never treated me like I was fragile. You treated me like I was someone who happened to be dealing with a temporary setback, someone who still had opinions and capabilities and things to offer. Because that's what you are, Ben said simply. The point is, Elena continued, you didn't just help me with physical therapy. You helped me remember who I was before the accident, and you helped me imagine who I might become after recovery. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in ways that surprised both of them. Elena began joining Ben and Mila for activities beyond the rehabilitation center, trips to the park, visits to the Children's Museum, and quiet evenings at Ben's modest apartment where Mila would demonstrate her latest artistic creations while Elena helped with dinner preparation. These domestic moments felt natural and comfortable, despite the vast differences in their backgrounds. Elena discovered that she genuinely enjoyed the rhythms of Ben's practical life, while Ben found himself enriched by Elena's perspectives on art, culture, and the larger world beyond his immediate experience. The breakthrough moment came during a therapy session that none of them would ever forget. Elena had been working with a specialized standing frame that allowed her to bear weight on her legs while maintaining balance through upper body support. For weeks, she had been able to stand for increasing periods, but actual independent steps had remained elusive. On this particular afternoon, Mila was playing with her collection of toy horses on a mat nearby, while Ben worked with Elena on balance exercises. The physical therapist had stepped away briefly to answer a phone call, leaving the three of them alone in the therapy room. "Miss Elena," Mila said suddenly, looking up from her toys, "will you come pet the horses with me? They're lonely over here." Elena looked at the distance between her position in the standing frame and the mat where Mila was playing, perhaps 8 feet of open floor. "I can't walk that far yet, sweetie," Elena said gently. Mila considered this problem with the practical problem-solving approach she had inherited from her father. "What if you try really, really hard? My daddy says sometimes our bodies can do things we don't think they can do if we want them enough." Something in Mila's innocent confidence triggered a decision in Elena. With trembling hands, she began to release the supports that had been holding her upright. "Elena, wait," Ben said, moving closer in case she needed assistance. But Elena was already taking her first independent step in 6 months. Her legs shook with the effort, and her movement was careful and uncertain, but she was walking. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. By the 4th step, tears were streaming down Elena's face, but she continued moving toward Mila, who was jumping up and down with excitement. "You're doing it! You're doing it!" Mila cheered. Ben walked alongside Elena, close enough to catch her if she fell, but far enough away to allow her the dignity of independent movement. His own eyes were filled with tears as he watched Elena accomplish something that had seemed impossible just moments earlier. When Elena finally reached the mat and carefully lowered herself to sit beside Mila, all 3 of them were crying and laughing simultaneously. "I knew you could do it," Mila announced, throwing her arms around Elena's neck. "I knew your legs would remember how." Elena held Mila tightly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. But when she looked up at Ben, she realized that the physical breakthrough was only part of what she was experiencing. "Ben," she said softly, "you didn't just help me learn to walk again. You helped me learn to believe in possibilities I thought I had lost forever." Ben knelt beside them on the mat, his hand gently touching Elena's shoulder. "You did this yourself," he said. "Mila and I just cheered you on." That evening, after they had celebrated Elena's breakthrough with ice cream and phone calls to share the news with Elena's father and medical team, Ben and Elena found themselves alone on the patio outside the rehabilitation center, while Mila played in the nearby garden. "I need to tell you something," Elena said, her voice carrying a mixture of nervousness and determination. Ben turned to face her, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to say. "I'm falling in love with you," Elena said simply. "Not because you helped me walk again, but because you helped me remember who I am. You and Mila have become the most important part of my life." Ben felt his heart skip as Elena's words confirmed feelings he had been trying to understand himself. "Elena," he said softly, "I don't know what I have to offer you beyond this." He gestured to encompass himself, his modest circumstances, and his responsibilities as a single father. "But if you're willing to take on a package deal with Mila and me, I can't imagine anything that would make me happier." Elena reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers, with the same careful intention she brought to everything important in her life. "I want the package deal," she said with a smile that transformed her entire face. "I want morning chaos and bedtime stories and engineering projects and dance lessons and everything that comes with building a life together." As they kissed for the first time, with Mila's delighted laughter echoing from the garden, both Ben and Elena understood that they had found something neither of them had been looking for, but both of them desperately needed. 1 year later, the gardens of the Langston estate had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. for a wedding that celebrated both elegance and the kind of authentic joy that money couldn't purchase. White roses climbed trellises throughout the manicured grounds, while string lights created a canopy of stars above the ceremony area, where family and friends had gathered to witness Elena and Ben exchange vows. Elena stood at the altar in a simple but stunning wedding dress that had been designed to accommodate her complete mobility recovery while honoring her background as a dancer. She moved with fluid grace that spoke of months of dedicated rehabilitation and the confidence that came from knowing her body was strong and capable once again. Ben waited for her wearing a tailored suit that Elena had insisted on purchasing for him, though he had drawn the line at anything too formal for someone who still spent his days solving engineering problems with his hands. His smile as Elena approached carried the wonder of someone who still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. But perhaps the most radiant member of the wedding party was 6-year-old Mila, who practically glowed in her flower girl dress as she scattered rose petals with the serious concentration of someone entrusted with an important job. She had insisted on calling Elena Mama Elena for months, and today would make that relationship official in every sense. "Mama Elena," Mila had whispered during the ceremony rehearsal, "you look like a real princess." "Well," Elena had whispered back, "princesses are lucky to have such wonderful flower girls to help them on their special days." As the ceremony concluded and the newlyweds kissed to enthusiastic applause, Mila ran forward and threw her arms around both of them. "Now we're really a family," she announced to the assembled guests with the kind of joy that made everyone smile. During the reception, Everett Langston approached Ben with an expression that had evolved considerably from their first meeting in the corporate office. "You know," Everett said, placing a hand on Ben's shoulder, "you've taught me something about the difference between providing for someone and actually caring for them." Ben looked at his new father-in-law with appreciation for how much their relationship had developed over the months of planning this wedding. "Elena taught me the same thing," Ben replied. "She showed me that love isn't about what you can give someone. It's about what you can build together." Everett nodded, his eyes finding his daughter as she danced with her new stepdaughter to music that had been specially chosen for its appeal to 6-year-old sensibilities. "I spent Elena's entire childhood trying to give her everything I thought would make her happy," Everett continued. "It took watching her with you and Mila to realize that what she really needed was someone who saw her as complete exactly as she is." As the evening progressed, the celebration moved seamlessly between formal elegance and the kind of relaxed family gathering that Elena had come to treasure through her relationship with Ben and Mila. The elaborate wedding cake shared space with Mila's handmade decorations, and the professional photography captured both posed portraits and candid moments of pure happiness. But perhaps the most meaningful moment of the entire day came during Elena's speech to their guests. "A year ago," Elena said, her voice clear and confident as she addressed the assembled family and friends, "I thought my life had ended because I couldn't do the things I had always done. Ben and Mila taught me that life doesn't end when circumstances change. It just takes different and sometimes more beautiful forms." She looked at her new family with love that was visible to everyone present. "They didn't rescue me from my situation," Elena continued. "They helped me discover that I was stronger than my situation, and that happiness often begins from the most ordinary moments when extraordinary people choose to care about each other." As the celebration continued late into the evening, with Mila finally falling asleep in Elena's arms, while Ben and Everett discussed plans for expanding the engineering consulting business, everyone present understood they had witnessed something special, the creation of a family built on love, resilience, and the courage to believe in new possibilities. Do you believe that genuine love can heal any wound? Please subscribe to Hidden Heroine, where we celebrate the beautiful stories of courage, healing, and love that change lives forever.